Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 23rd episode of eTalks, where we're joined by William Mead, who is a seasoned designer, technologist, and educator with over 30 years of experience. Originally from Boston, he established and led the media arts program at Boston Arts Academy, known for its innovative, student-centered approach. After relocating to California, he directed the design department at the Art Institute of California, Sacramento, and has taught web design and development at UC Davis, American River College, and Syria College. A leader in his field, Mr. Mead has organized community events like WorldCamp and served on advisory committees for UC Davis and American River College, and he is an active artist. He is a member of Access Gallery, where he participates in acclaimed exhibitions across Sacramento. And we are joined by our lovely moderator, Dilara Sarugaz, who is a 2023 UC Davis graduate, currently working as a sole designer in the Bay Area startup company. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Mead. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it.
There was so
And
much more to say, honestly. We had to shorten it, but we love
that's,
it.
that was wonderful, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate being invited. And so, yeah, let's get started.
All
Um,
right, then. I'll be handing the microphone over to the both of you.
okay, I have a short agenda here. These are the things that we'll be talking about over the next 30 minutes or so. And I'm not going to belabor this, but we'll just sort of move forward. That was a really nice introduction. Thank you. I just wanted to do just a quick slide, a little bit more about my teaching experience. I'm not going to stay in this for too long, but I started teaching my first job, my first professional teaching job in the fall of 1992 in a middle school in the suburbs of Boston. And I taught middle school for 8 years. And then in the fall of 2000, I went to Boston Arts Academy, which is about the coolest high school you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's really an amazing place. If you go look it up online, you'll see what I mean. It's just an amazing, amazing place. It was a startup school, and we were doing everything to get that school up and running. It was super exciting time, very exhausting. In 2005, I moved from Boston to California and took a few years off of teaching. I was really kind of burnt out from teaching at Boston Arts Academy and thought I was done with teaching. But in the spring of 2008, I started teaching just part-time at the community college, and that started my college teaching career. By the fall of 2008, I was teaching at Art Institute in Sacramento, which was open for only 10 years. But it was a really great school, and we did a lot of really great stuff there. And I'm still in touch with many of our grads there, and they're doing amazing work. And it was just a really amazing time. And then in 2016, I started teaching at UC Davis, which has been just wonderful, a really wonderful experience. So that's a little bit about me. And yes, on the left is a picture of me back when I had hair and was young and good looking, before I became old and fat and ugly and bald. But yeah, that's what happens when you do this stuff for 30 years. Okay, yeah, so teaching as a creative process. I just wanted to talk generally about teaching as a creative process to start. And I really see it as sort of fitting into two bubbles that are kind of different. On one side, we have curriculum development, and that side of the creativity is very sort of, I don't know, you could call it left brain. It's very content about content organization, creating flows. It's a lot about structure, scaffolding your content, and making connections to learning outcomes. It's very organized. It's a very organized way of thinking. And if you're teaching online classes, or if you're interested in putting together a YouTube channel or doing anything where you're doing kind of prolonged sort of remote education type work where you're not working directly with students, that's really where you live creatively with teaching, is sort of in creating the content, and not so much on the presentation delivery. Although if you're doing YouTube videos, you're probably doing that as well. But the other side is sort of the presentation delivery side of it, where you're in the classroom, you're working with students, and you are, being a stand-up comedian, a storyteller. It's about the interpersonal interactions. It's about the timing in class, being able to find the right space for the content that you developed. and creating an environment for learning. And what's great is really how these two things work together. And I love both sides of it. I really love sort of creating the curriculum and figuring out how to best deliver that, and then actually doing it in class and seeing how students respond to it and getting feedback and then working on improving that. And that kind of gives me kind of an overview of sort of the creative processes involved.
I think this delivery side is actually really interesting. Do you have a specific example of how you used comedy or storytelling in your classroom?
I think really the the best way comedy comes out, it comes out very naturally. You have to be natural about it. And that's where this slide actually comes in. The know thyself slide. This theme has come up recently in my life a few times, recently in a couple of places, and it really resonates with me in things that I've seen recently. And it's an old idea that we talk about a lot, but we don't always think about it. And the the thing is that you have to really lean into your personal experiences, and you have to lean into what's going on in your life, and you have to be comfortable with yourself to get the confidence. And that's something that's not easy to do to start off with as a teacher, but it's a place that you can get to with practice. I think one of the things that's not as known as it should be about teaching is that teaching is a learned skill. It's something you learn to get good at through practice. And some people are naturals at it. Some people are just naturals at it. I was not a natural at teaching, and it took me a long time to get good at teaching. And really, that has a lot to do with sort of knowing yourself and knowing where your strengths are and where you can sort of put in those stories and where they're useful and where they're not, and where they're taking away from the student experience. You don't want to take up too much of their time and make it about you, but you want to sort of augment things. So it's a thing that you have to kind of feel out, I think. That's a great question. Before we go further, I just want to have some acknowledgments that kind of relate to this, and acknowledge some of the privilege that I have, especially currently in my current jobs teaching. And that is one that I teach zero BS classes, 0% BS classes. And I spent 8 years teaching middle school, 5 years teaching high school. And I know that like some people who are teaching don't have the privilege of teaching classes to students who actually want to be there, who actually want to learn stuff, who actually want to do things, who are excited about content. And I'm very lucky to have classes and be in a teaching situation now where I get to take advantage of that. And that's not always the case. And I just want to acknowledge that. Sometimes you're fighting an uphill battle in the classroom, and I have in the past, and it's not always fun, but you can still have fun times doing it. I certainly did in both middle school and high school, but it's definitely harder in some situations and harder in some subjects. Also, going back to learning to teach, I've had the advantage of working with amazing colleagues over the years, starting right in the middle school where I started and the high school where I taught, and right up till to today, where I work very collaboratively with other faculty at UC Davis. I learned from watching other people, being in other classrooms, observing colleagues, and I've had the good fortune of being able to do that, to have my teaching jobs have often involved being in other people's classrooms. And that's really helped me become a better teacher. So that's a good thing as well. And then the other privilege is that most of my teaching career has been half in administration and half in the classroom. And the advantage there is that you really get to see how a school runs. And by doing both administrative work and being a teacher in the classroom, you're connected to the whole system. These last years teaching at UC Davis, I've really just been in the classroom, and it's wonderful to not have to do all the administrative work, to not have to be a department chair, to not have to, do all of that stuff, and sit on 6 million committees and do all these different kinds of things. But Most of my teaching career, I have done a lot of that work, and it's been a tremendous advantage in sort of learning how to understand what's important in the classroom and how what I'm doing in the classroom connects to what other people are doing in the classroom. Which goes on to sort of the next thing I want to talk about, which is sort of a spectrum of education and design. And I've been teaching in design now for a long time, and I've noticed through observing other classrooms, working with other faculty, and paying attention to other schools, that there's a pretty broad spectrum of how design is actually taught in classes. On one end of the spectrum, the far left, at the end of the yellow arrow, is more of an apprenticeship model, and it's much more of a teacher-directed, teacher-centered, art-directed model for teaching design. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a great way to go. But the other end is kind of more where I am. It's much more in a student-centered experiential model, where students are constructing their own content, constructing their own knowledge through experiences and through experimentation. And I try to remove my authority from that process as much as I possibly can, in the hopes that they will find their own thing. There's nothing wrong with the apprenticeship model. And in fact, in most design schools, every design school I've ever seen actually usually has one, if not many, professors, instructors, teachers who have come from industry and teach the way they were taught, which is most often an apprenticeship model. It is in design, it's being art directed through the work. Use your typography like this, use these fonts, use these colors, use layouts like this is how you do layout, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's a great way to learn. And I'm thankful that students get that experience from other faculty. I'm just not doing it. But in the apprenticeship model, the quality of the work is often higher, but the work is more likely to look the same. Student work is all likely to look fairly much the same, because the instructor is telling them what to do. They're art directing them through it. And that can be great. I mean, you'll end up with really nice quality work that way. Some schools I've had, as was mentioned earlier, I've participated in many professional advisory committees where we bring in professionals from the industry. And I've had several of them tell me over the years that, if they're hiring a student that graduated from CCAA, California College of the Arts, they very much there follow this apprenticeship model. And if they hire somebody from there, they're hiring somebody for their personality, because pretty much all the work looks the same. One student's portfolio looks pretty much exactly the same as the next student's. And so they know exactly where they are in terms of their skills. They're just looking for a personality that's going to fit in with their company and their team. And that's a way to go. There's nothing wrong with learning that way. And most schools have people who are teaching following this model. I'm much more the, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Have you had to work in a school that you had to follow the apprenticeship teaching model where you didn't want to?
No, but I would say that over the year, I used to do much more of that. I used to do much more sort of critiques and, giving my opinion on students' work. And in recent years, I would say within the last 5 years, I've moved further and further towards the right of that, and towards this constructivist model. And part of the reason for that is, things that are going on culturally, particularly with Black Lives Matter, and with sort of diversity, a push towards more diversity. When I'm giving my opinion, you're getting the opinion of a white European descendant, European educated person. And that's fine. And if people want that, I'm happy to give that to them. But in a more constructivist model, it allows for less bias. It allows people to bring in their aesthetics. And there are different aesthetics in the world than sort of the white European aesthetic. And I think that there's a lot of room there to explore that and think about that. So I think I'd move more towards this direction. I will say that the work is more likely to be of an uneven quality. It's very tempting for me to say, fix that typography or those colors look terrible together. But I really do my best to try not to care too much about the quality of student work. The reality is that as designers, we're all evolving and improving as we go along. And I'm sure you found this yourself, Valeria, as you've worked, as you're working now professionally. If you go back and look at the project you were proud of at UC Davis, you probably look at them now and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I was proud of that. And
Oh
that's
yeah, for sure.
and that's where we are as designers, that we all go through that. And if we aren't, if you're in school, in design school, and you're like not trying to get better and later not getting a job doing design work, then who cares if your work was any good? you know? So ultimately, I really try not to care too much about the quality of students' work because I care about the process and I care about the effort that goes into improving it, and then the quality will come. It will come with time.
Do you think this model is also more suitable with people who or students who might require more accommodations?
Yeah, absolutely, because it allows them to breathe and have the room to sort of be neurodivergent or have their own aesthetic, or I have students who are colorblind. There are a lot of colorblind designers, and so I think there is a lot more room in there for people to. It's a process much more about improving your design work from where it is, rather than worrying too much about how it stacks up against how somebody else's work looks. Um, yeah. The difficult thing is that then students want to enter competitions, and the work they have is going to be stacked up against how somebody else's work looks. And so that's where kind of the rub comes in. And those people judging are perhaps judging from a more standard white European educated background. So, I mean, that's kind of the trade-off. Um, Another thing that has really informed me as a teacher, and I think is really important in sort of thinking about creating a creative classroom, is this book here, Designing for Emotion, highly recommended. Short book, you can read it in an afternoon, and there are some major principles in this book that have to do with the fact that as human beings, we're emotional beings, and we respond emotionally to things. As much as we like to think of ourselves as um, being very rational people and reason oriented. We are very emotional. And while he in this book is talking specifically about design and about user experience, the classroom is also a user experience. And these principles apply to teaching. Surprise and delight. We were talking earlier about storytelling and joking around and that kind of stuff. And that's where these things can really come in and add to a class. Anticipation, same thing. It's very important. And then velvet rope and status, how to make people feel special. From the start, learning students' names. I've had comments from students that say, I can't believe you learned my name in the first week, and just little things like that can help. Providing special opportunities, sometimes opportunities for studio tours come up, and there are lots of things that you can do along the way. Forgiveness is important. Sometimes things don't go as planned, and you just have to apologize, rather than double down on, you didn't do this right, blah, blah, blah. Just say you're sorry and move on. But the most important one is the fifth one, priming. This is the one I think about the most. And that is about the feedback loop of positive and negative experiences. In the classroom, you're creating an experience. And if it's a positive experience, students will want to come back. And if it's a negative experience, students won't want to come back. And so, if students come into the classroom and I wag my finger at them and say, oh, you didn't do the homework, you're bad, your grades are going to suffer. Next week they're going to think, I have to go back to that class with that guy who yells at me. And, and that doesn't feel good. And maybe you're not going to want to go back to that class. Whereas if you create positive experiences in the class, then you're more likely to get people wanting to come back and have positive experiences. Just one quick story about this. There was one teacher I was working with at another school, and she had a reputation for just being terrible. Everybody hated her. Even really good students I had were like, "Oh, I learned nothing from her class," and um, and she felt really bad about it. She asked me, "Will you come sit in my class and help me understand why students don't like what I'm doing?" And her projects were fine. She was German, and she had this very sort of strict kind of German sort of delivery that I don't think went over well with American teenagers. But ultimately, like, her projects were fine, but she had this reputation, and then the reputation preceded her, and everybody just gave her a really hard time. I always felt really bad about that. Um,
What was she able to improve on it in any way, or?
She actually left that school kind of under a cloud of disappointment in the end. She was not able to turn it around. I have seen people turn it around. I've seen professors at UC Davis start with kind of a bad reputation and get better at teaching. But um, it's hard to do once, you think of like if you sand against the grain, you have to sand 50 times with the grain to sort of wipe that out kind of metaphor. And it's kind of like that. So you have to be really careful not to create bad experiences in the classroom. Um, One of my students last week said, "This is the one class this term that I wish was not coming to an end." It's
That's
like
awesome.
this is the kind of thing that you live for, right? And this was just last week. So, I'm always very happy to hear that kind of stuff. And I get really great comments off and on here and there. And that makes my week and makes my day. Um, Teaching and creating sort of a space for creativity in the classroom, it's kind of like, how people say that music isn't the notes, it's the space between the notes. But you have to study the notes and you have to understand how they're structured to get to the space between the notes. And it's sort of the same thing with teaching in that everything I do, all the structures I set up for classes are about trying to reduce stress because learning is hard and it takes time and there's the potential for failure and students don't want to fail. And so there's all of that kind of stuff going on. So again, keeping in mind my privilege of teaching 0% BS classes, I do the best I can to reduce the position of my authority. It's not about what I like. It's not about what I think your project should be. What are you proud of? What are you going to be excited about putting in your portfolio? So I really try to reduce that position of authority wherever I can. I've always found that the carrot is better than the stick with teaching. I've tried over the years things like, having tests and saying, if you don't do this reading, you're going to do badly. And none of that ever works. It's all about the carrot. It's all about making things better and looking for those opportunities. Um, Also, teaching in college, particularly college, I've worked with a lot of professors who have zero experience teaching, and I've seen all manner of horrible things around grades and assessment out there in college. So I'm sure you experienced this. Some at UC Davis, where people have like one project at the end of the quarter, and like everything rides on this one grade that they take forever to grade, and you know that's just not good for anybody. It helps create more stress. So I try to remove high stakes situations. I'm not interested in having, you know, 4 midterm tests during a quarter. That's crazy that people do that at UC Davis. But many small assignments is much better than a bigger one. Being able to iterate and improve your projects, using rubrics and keeping them simple, not a rubric that's 10 pages long, not a rubric that has like 15 levels of quality that are hard to sort of decipher, but keep it simple and stupid. Um, and then a late policy. I have a late policy that students can turn in work late, and the learning management system automatically deducts 2% per day. So if you're a day or two late, it's really not going to tank your grade. If you're really late, you start to fall behind, and that's really going to hurt you. But students have over and over and over again told me how helpful it is for them to have that late policy. So I really recommend it if you can do it. And a lot of faculty just simply refuse to do that. They feel like it makes it harder for them to do grading. But to me, it's a really important piece of the process.
You said you want students to feel proud of their work, and I actually have a specific memory about this at Davis. I remember we were doing like a feedback session for one of my projects with my design professor, and she asked me, "Are you proud of your work?" And that totally took me by surprise because no other professor had ever asked me that question. And also, like classes like STEM classes, like science and math, like nobody asks you, "Are you proud of yourself?" You know? So I was like,
Yeah,
whoa, there's an emotional element to this. Like, I should be proud of my work. So that definitely took me by surprise, I remember.
that's excellent. That makes me happy to hear that somebody asked you that. And I think it's really important. Very good. One final thing I just want to talk about quickly, just because it's something that's on everybody's mind, which is about artificial intelligence. And ultimately, I think that if you're doing project-based work in your classes, if you're doing meaningful assignments, if you're doing process assignments, artificial intelligence can be a great tool to help you learn and improve your understanding of things rather than a tool that's used to kind of just cheat and slip under the wire. Um, I tell my students to keep an AI journal. I don't think anybody really knows yet exactly how this is going to shake out, but I think it's pretty clear that the people who know how to use AI as a tool are going to replace the people who don't know how to use AI as a tool. And so I recommend keeping an artificial intelligence journal and keep track of, the prompts you use, how you use them, how they help you make work and make work better. The image on the left here I actually created in Midjourney and then further adjusted in Photoshop. Um, I think there are kinds of fun things that you can do with it. And I highly recommend finding ways of using it that helps you be productive, but being clear about what's yours and what's not yours so that you can talk about that. If you're in a job interview, bring that AI journal with you. That could be a really great point of discussion when you're talking in a job.
I've
And there we
never
go.
heard of an AI journal. That's really interesting. That's a good thing to know.
Yeah, I think it's a good practice these days. I've kind of worked out talking with students about this stuff actually. I think students doing internships and that kind of stuff are
Mhm.
often using artificial intelligence as part of their internship. I think it's a really good idea to keep a journal of how you're using it and what you're using it for, because we don't know where this thing's going to go yet, but
Yeah.
it's going to be important.
So I actually have a personal question regarding this.
Go
So
ahead.
the year I was graduating was actually when like generative AI and ChatGPT and stuff were like just coming out. And I remember in your class we were doing HTML and CSS, and you had actually suggested that we use generative AI to create our image thumbnails for the blogs that we had coded ourselves. And so that was actually the first time I think I probably used generative AI. So, but then like over the past year, things have developed so much, and like design tools that we use every day are now implementing AI into them. And even just AI aside, like there's so many new features coming out all the time, like with Adobe, Figma, up just released a bunch of new updates. So what I'm wondering is like, as an instructor, how do you keep up to date with all of these new developments and teach them to your students?
That's a great question, and I can't pretend to keep up with everything. Like I do the best I can. I've got all my subscriptions to magazines and articles that I read. The default answer for everybody who gives a talk ever is do lots of reading, right? But I think what's interesting about the generative AI and the images in particular, and Midjourney and some of these tools, is that it's evolved so quickly, like you have said. It's become very clear that there are ways in which people are using AI, especially for image generation, that are not good, where things look generated by AI has a certain look to it. And unless you're going in and physically manipulating those things, they look like a cheap replacement for stock photos, basically. And it kind of stands out these days. So that's something that's new since you were in that class in 2023. It's become increasingly clear that AI, generative AI for image making is kind of like the lazy person's way of getting away from having to have a photographer and take photos. Before it was stock photography. We've all seen like those same stock photos at the tops of Medium articles for years, and you get bored of seeing the same ones. So generative AI seems like it's something new, but it gets old very quickly unless you're
Yeah.
doing it the right way. And the right way is thinking critically about imagery and trying to do some of this stuff. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I answered you. Did I answer you well enough?
I think so. Do you have like resources that you use maybe like to catch up for yourself? Maybe not necessarily for teaching, like stay
I
up to
mean,
date.
I have a Medium subscription. I actually pay for Medium. So,
Hmm.
and the articles in Medium are really hit and miss. Some of them are good and some of them are terrible. Um, but I keep an eye on that. There's Smashing Magazine. There's, some of them have gone away recently. Envision, unfortunately, is closing at the end of this month. Um, they had a really great blog and did a lot of really great work in the area. So some of them are going away, some of it's changing, but um, I pay attention to certain publications. I like the Verge publication for technology-oriented stuff and sort of the larger conversation about what's going on in the technology world. Um, so those are resources that I'm paying attention to. Uh, I also follow a lot of YouTube channels, um, and particularly around stuff around AI. I think it's fascinating. I think AI is the most exciting thing to come around in a while, but it's definitely got its ups and downs. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens with it.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have questions from the audience now. Um, so one is about interdisciplinary concepts in design. So like design, if you're a designer and you're working in the industry, you can work in different fields, so you kind of have to know about them. Or like ultimately you're designing for people, so there's like the psychological aspect of it, or you're designing a product or designing to promote a product. So you might have to know some marketing. So like how much do you feel like you need to know or have a grasp of these more interdisciplinary ideas in your teaching for design?
Um, my teaching focuses on the basics. I'm all about the basics, and I think, and what I've gotten from talking to professionals who are hiring students who are graduating is that they want to know that students know how to do the basics, um, typography, drawing, basic drafting skills. You know, whether you're talking about interior design, fashion design, web design, graphic design, across all of these fields, when people are hiring, they know that they're going to have to do training, especially for a junior level position. They know they're going to have to train people on their processes and their procedures, and they're going to have to teach them about their branding guidelines and all of those types of things. Um, so it really is about the basics, and the basics are the hard skills, like I mentioned, but also soft skills around, communicating, um, and being able to write emails and be professional and that kind of stuff as well. Um, so, part of the way I teach classes with having a lot of assignments and doing a lot of iteration, it provides that space for students to communicate and tell me what's going on with them, what's going on with their projects. And I think that that's all really good practice for later when they're going to need to do that stuff professionally.
Mhm. I think that's really relieving to hear for upcoming grads. It's good to be knowledgeable, but you don't need to know everything.
No, you're not going to know everything.
All right. Another question that we have is what is the future of AI with design, and do you think it's sustainable?
The future of AI with design. I mean, I think I don't know if this is really getting at what the question is asking, but I think if the question is asking, is AI going to replace designers? I think the answer is no. I mean, the big problem with AI is it looks intelligent, but it's not actually intelligent. It's in the name. It's artificial intelligence. It's fake intelligence. And it looks intelligent, but it's not really thinking. If we're talking about writing, it's just guessing what the next word is going to be based on a predictive model. So it doesn't really know anything. So at the end of the day, are are designers going to be replaced by AI? I don't think so, because a lot of design is problem solving, it's understanding problems at a much deeper level. And even if you can get AI to understand problems at a fundamental level, I mean, it's very rudimentary, it's very fundamental. I mean, I think about this. Apple spent 10 years and $10 billion trying to build a self driving car and gave up. They gave up. They gave up on the whole thing. And for driving, I mean, driving's very simple. There's very simple rules of driving. You just have to do three things. Don't hit anybody, don't let anybody hit you, and avoid the cops. That's it. That's all you have to do, right? And it's just very simple. But, you know, even just with that very simple thing, getting a car to be autonomous, you know, when we think about a car making choices about when to stop and when to go, it's a lot harder than you think it is. So I don't think that artificial intelligence is as intelligent as it seems to be. So I don't think it's going to replace designers. Designers will work with it, but um, I don't know. I just don't think so.
Yeah,
I,
I agree. I think some people are scared they're going to replace their jobs, but a bigger fear that I had was like not that AI would replace my job, but more that I wouldn't be able to adapt fast enough with AI and become competitive in my field, for example. That was a bigger
I,
fear I had.
I definitely think that's a worthy fear. I definitely think it's true that the people who know how to use AI are going to replace those who don't. And the teams might get smaller. Where you had a four-person team, you might have a three-person team, especially on the development side, because developers can be so much more productive now with AI writing chunks of code for them. It's not going to write the whole app for you. I mean, I just don't believe that. I mean, people are doing it. I see people on YouTube like, oh, I had AI make this game for me in 10 minutes. And you look at the game and it's crap. It's like, yeah, well, I can make something that's crap in 10 minutes too. Like, I don't need AI for that. So, I think it's definitely true that teams might get smaller, but I don't know, every other time in history when we've had an increase in productivity of individuals, there has been an increase in what we produced to go along with it. So I don't know. We'll see how it pans out.
Only time will tell. All right. So our last question from the audience is, what are some YouTubers that Mr. Mead would recommend?
Oh, for what?
I think because you mentioned that you watch a bunch of YouTube videos to stay up to date.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'd be kind of embarrassed to even say what they are. I mean, I watch YouTube channels for people who do recaps of TV shows. I watch YouTube channels for people who are building their own gaming PCs. I watch YouTube channels for people who are designing their offices and desk accessories, like all kinds of weird stuff. And my favorite YouTube videos are cat videos. I watch
Oh,
an inordinate number of cat videos online. That's how I deal with the news.
do you have a top like design channel?
Oh goodness. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. I don't know. I'm sorry. You know, the Verge podcast is really good. I try to listen to that every week. I'm forgetting exactly what it's called, but it's on. If you go to the Verge website, you can find their podcast really easily. And I really like their commitment to journalism and the way they think and talk about how technology and design and these kinds of things are impacted by business. Because I'm not in the business world, so that's not something I generally get much of. So I really appreciate what they're doing. So I would recommend that one.
That's great. Thank you. I think this was a really insightful conversation for upcoming teachers in creative fields, but also it was really interesting for me too, as like a former student, kind of seeing on the back end what a teacher does to prepare and different aspects of teaching and whatnot. So as e-talks, we have three set questions that we ask to our guests. So our first question is, what is your favorite color? You have a lot of colors in the back, but I'm wondering, is your favorite color there too?
My favorite color is orange.
Oh,
That orange on my wall back there, that's probably my favorite color.
oh, great. All right, second question. What are three books you'd recommend to our audience?
Three books. Well, I already mentioned the Designing for Emotion book. I think that's a fantastic book.
Mhm.
If you're looking for fiction, I really love the Murakami novels. 1Q84 is a super long novel, but I love that stuff. He's a Japanese writer. It's just fantastic. And um, oh, I'm really into this philosopher. I'm going to get his name wrong. He's a Israeli philosopher, Yuval Harari. Wrote a book called 21 Problems for the 21st Century. He is a really good sort of philosophical thinker. His writing is he's very positive, even though he's talking about challenges for humanity. Um, and I just really like the way he thinks. And you can find him on YouTube giving lots of interviews. He's a super interesting guy, and I really appreciate his stuff.
All right. And then the last question is, you kind of touched on this, I think, but what are three movies or TV shows you'd recommend?
Oh my goodness. I am I watch a lot of television and movies. That's like my hobby is to watch television and movies. And if I were to mention favorites, I'm a Trekkie. I love Star Trek, so anything Star Trek I'm into. Um, and uh, Favorite TV shows of all time, I would say Veronica Mars is like one of those TV shows that you could watch over and over and over again and just always enjoy. And then these days, the things I'm watching, there's this new Dune TV series that I'm enjoying. The Silo on Apple TV Plus is probably one of the best TV shows this year, I think. Um, and that's sort of ongoing right now. So that gives you kind of a range of stuff to think about.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mead, for this amazing discussion you had with Dilara. This topic was very insightful for me and for a lot of our friends. It was great having you. It was great having you as well, Dilara. Thank you so much. And I hope to see both of you on eTalks again in the future. And thank you to our audience who came and joined us for this episode. I hope you guys all have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it? Are we all set?
Yeah, we are.
I got my dog climbing around behind me now.
Came
This
just